Actually, I'm going to talk about ticketing, and I'm going to talk about ticketing strategies. To an extent, I may be posing rather more questions than I'm going to offer answers. But with luck, that might generate some discussion if we have some time at the end. I particularly am interested in technology. But if we're talking about ticketing, by this I mean what offer we make to our passengers and users, how we price them, how people buy them, how people use tickets. I think even though this conference is largely about the regional context, I believe that there's the same argument in the regional context as there is in the urban context about trying to make public transport the mode of choice for an increasingly large number of journeys that people want to make. Ticketing obviously is an important part of the mix. Everyone's very keen to see a multimodal approach, and that topic may come up a little later, but I will always counsel caution by saying we have to consider what is achievable, desirable and affordable, and perhaps we'll come back to that in a little while. The conference has been looking at technology. In ticketing particularly, technology moves very quickly, and it's very difficult to keep up with what the changes are and to know what you should do and when you should do it. A part of that is an important part of the problem. Oyster was mentioned this morning. It was suggested that one of the workshops said that the Oyster card in London was an ideal to which one should aspire elsewhere. I think that's quite interesting, bearing in mind that TfL is also looking at how Oyster card would work in the future as technology changes. There are 30 million Oyster cards on issue in a city of 8 million people. That's an enormous number of cards to maintain in a database. And then you have different systems in Paris and in Brussels, and the whole of the Netherlands has its own system where that's not yet been fully rolled out 2 years after the first process. Of course, new technology is extremely seductive. Every politician in Europe, every politician across Europe and in the European Union has a vision which they're very happy to articulate of having a single ticket that allows travel by all modes all the way across Europe from door to door. I was very grateful that the chairman of the Transport and Tourism Committee of the European Union Parliament came recently to the UITP Congress in Dubai. That's Brian Simpson, who lives in the northwest of England, and he spoke then about his vision of having a single ticket to go from Wigan to Milan. As far as I know, not that many people will come in the opposite direction, but it's an interesting vision that he has, and he wants it to be what appears to be a single piece of paper. I think that's a very challengeable argument that we should do that. Because, well, for one thing, just how many people are going to make the first journey, let alone the return journey, and I have nothing against Wigan, even though I'm a Yorkshireman. The key question is, and it was the point that was made in the session before me, is that public transport has to be about what people want and about the benefits that individuals and communities can achieve from improvements that we make in the services that we provide. Now, one of the big questions to consider is the scale of the business that we are talking about. Nobody actually knows for certain how many trips are made by urban and suburban and regional public transport every year in the European Union. Nobody knows for absolutely certain because lots of people count trips in different ways. It's easy if everybody has a ticket. It's not so easy if people have cards. It's difficult to decide when I leave here and go up to my flat in Islington. I'll take the bus for two stops. I mean, that's hardly a trip. It's just laziness. But I probably will count somewhere in the statistics. But there are probably about 60 billion journeys made every year by local public transport in the European Union. 170 million a day, something like that. There's about 1 billion by long-distance trains every year in the European Union, a much smaller number made by air. It's an interesting question if you start looking at the politics, at what end people start. And they often start by saying, I want to be able to get a plane ticket that also includes the journey to and from the airport. Actually, we don't want all this to be driven by the airlines. But it is a huge number, and the challenge of that huge number, it means that we have to process vast amounts of data every day, accurately, reliably, and quickly. You want, with your Oyster card, to be able to walk through the barrier at King's Cross Station by putting your Oyster card on the reader as you're walking up, so the gates open and you don't break your step. If that actually means you have to slow down, the processing of people through that ticket barrier at King's Cross Station will be much worse and will create much more congestion. And that speed and accuracy is an important part of any of our ticketing processes, and it's not always that easy. And we also need to record with absolute accuracy the financial impact on passengers and on operators of the ticketing arrangements that they're making. And that probably means that we have to adapt ourselves to very different public transport markets, for example, in a big metropolitan area like London or Paris, or Leeds or Manchester, compared, for example, to the Highlands of Scotland, where much smaller numbers of people are travelling and possibly much less often. Now, of course, there is, he says, slightly editing what he was going to say now to cut down a bit of time. Of course, there is an important role for information technology in public transport, and my question remains, what's desirable, what's feasible, and what's affordable? And for a moment, I'd like to look at a slightly related topic, which is the topic of information about journey planning. And it's relevant at the moment because the European Commission has a consultation at present about European journey planning. It's clear that we need to provide more and better information about the trips that we want people to make so that we can be more informed about our travel choices, about when to travel, for example, and also about what the problems might be that are happening in real time on networks. Some of that's very difficult. The railways in the UK cannot tell you about a timetable change tomorrow if there is a problem. They can't tell you after 2 o'clock. It's impossible to get that information loaded onto their system. If there's a problem this afternoon, the new timetable can't be shown on the website tomorrow. It's simply too difficult, they tell me. But it's clear also that we would like to have some level of ticket price information when we're making journey planning, when we're doing journey planning. But there we do run into a huge issue. And that huge issue, which is growing and will grow, I think, across Europe, is the so-called yield management concept, where we actually price tickets based on the capacity of networks, particularly at peak or shoulder times. And given the costs of increasing capacity on public transport, I believe it's likely that yield management will become increasingly important across the whole of the European Union. In this, I would also include Switzerland, where, in fact, Swiss State Railways, SBB, does have some measure of yield management because you can buy some tickets which are advanced purchase and limit you on particular trains. It's not universal, but it's interesting that they are also looking at some of these similar problems. I think it'll become more and more common. So if you're going to do yield management, what impact does that have on information about journey planners? What should we show in Journey Planner when we are asked to show a fare? Do we show the maximum price you might pay, the minimum price you might pay, the range of prices you might pay? These are very difficult questions. Do we include the impact of social tariffs like reduced prices for people like me who can travel anywhere in England with my bus pass because I'm over 60? Do I need to tell the system that so it can work out what my ticket prices are? So these are again very, very big questions that which need to be resolved. Travel planning that doesn't look at ticket pricing is, of course, not giving a complete picture. But is it better to have not to have a complete picture rather than one that's too complex or out of date? And I must be absolutely clear about this. In my opinion, what we mustn't do is let the need to provide information in a particular way limit what sorts of ticket prices and ticketing we can do, so that we shouldn't be required to simplify ticketing policies just to be able to provide the information in an easier way. We have to be in a position where we can make the best ticketing offer to our passengers that we can do. So then, what is the role of integrated ticketing? Well, of course, at its simplest, it's about reducing barriers to travel by reducing the penalty for changing modes or changing services. Any change of mode brings with it a time penalty, a risk penalty, and clearly integrated ticketing can reduce the inconvenience, even if it doesn't actually affect the overall price of the journey. So clearly, and as we had the sort of Wigan to Milan idea, you could argue that that's some sort of integrated ticket. But in fact, do we need a ticket at all? Is that something that's now potentially going to be a slightly outmoded model? Integration then, in my opinion, depends on the complexity of a public transport network. Clearly, travel to work areas are very important. A lot also depends on who is deciding what the ticket prices are going to be. If it's the state, and if it isn't the state, if it's one single body that's pricing it and one single body that's taking the revenue risk, then of course the options are very much easier. But, ladies and gentlemen, in a time of great pressure on public finances, the state, I believe, may be less willing to take on the risks, the revenue risks and the pricing risks, and will somehow want to pass those on to operators, whether they're state-owned operators or private sector operators, but to pass them on to operators. In reality, of course, whenever you've got more than one organisation involved in a pricing and ticketing integration process, things become more complicated. Inevitably, they become more complicated. It doesn't matter whether it's the public sector or the private sector. Every organisation will want to know that it's getting its share of money, the money that is being paid by its residents, its voters, are actually bringing benefits to those people and not to people in a neighbouring area. If you wanted a history lesson, I could certainly talk about what used to happen many years ago about joint working arrangements between local authorities and how complicated those all were, but we'll do that on another day. But then if integration is your goal, and if integrated ticketing is your goal, then you'll tell me, I suspect, or you may tell me, that it's all a lot easier with smart cards and smart ticketing. And of course, it is up to a point. And the point is where we have to make a fundamental decision, which is, what is the process by which a passenger buys a ticket or loads money onto a smart ticket, and how is that ticket going to be used? Is it going to be something like Oyster Card in London, where you get effectively a travel credit or a cash value, which is deducted from your card when you make your first journey by bus? And of course that works in London because buses have a single ticket price, irrespective of the length of journey. If you have a system where the ticket price varies by length of journey, which inevitably it will do over a large regional area, then that simple process of simply putting a card on a reader doesn't work. It would then have to follow perhaps something like the London Underground model, where you actually have to put your card on the way in and on the way out. Now, my personal view is that's not a model that will work on buses. I genuinely do not believe that bus passengers will click on and click off when they're travelling by bus. I think it would seriously slow down the length of the journey, and it would radically increase the risk that exists already on the London Underground, which is people forget to tap their card off when they get off at, for example, the Docklands station at London City Airport, where there isn't a barrier. But you have to remember to cancel your card as you leave, otherwise you pay the full price for the whole network. So I think that's quite a difficult process. So are we then going to be in a position where, in fact, when the person boards the bus, there has to be some intervention to suggest how long their journey is? Now, these are real-world problems which we need to resolve. Now, London, by the way, doesn't have much in the way of long-distance bus services. That is to say, some of the bus services are very long, but people don't make long journeys on them. They tend to make longer journeys on the rail services, where it is a closed system in and out. Now, there clearly is a role for smart ticketing, and actually there is one group of people that I think we currently, in our ticketing offers, serve very badly. And that group is increasingly important, and it's people who work part-time, but who work part-time not by working 5 half days, but by working 3 days or days that don't come together in a week. Carnet-type tickets will work for that, but they, generally speaking, are card-based. I don't think we're very good at dealing with those and giving passengers who are making those sorts of journeys good deals when they are buying multi-journey tickets from us. Those passengers are not well catered for, but they are important for regional development in particular. Employers are looking for more and more flexibility. Employees themselves are looking for more and more flexibility in the way they have their work patterns. And I think that's one that we really do have to do something about. And all this means, I think, that we operators and public authorities who are involved in ticketing, need to rethink our entire pricing strategies. And that's not an easy task. So I spoke about technology moving very quickly, and I hope to finish in a minute or two. I think actually that smart ticketing isn't about smart cards. I think we have to be much more open to mobile phone-based near-field communication type technology, NFC technology. And the new credit cards, the EuroPay, MasterCard, Visa card, that we will all have fairly soon, which I think you can already use in Starbucks to buy a sandwich, where you actually have a card which allows you to make low-value transactions, such as buying a newspaper or buying a bus or underground ticket. Soon, all credit cards and debit cards will have that sort of technology. It'll identify the card holder to the reader on the bus. The back office in the system can then calculate what the price would be, and that actually would then be charged back to the holder's bank account in some magical way. It means that you don't have to have a completely separate freestanding Oyster card type system, and I do believe that that's the direction that we will see Transport for London moving in fairly soon. Now, what's that all lead to then? And I'll finish with 4 or 5, or possibly 6 points. New technology is very challenging. It's challenging how we pay for goods and services in our everyday life. We, bus operators and local authorities, I think, need to rethink our pricing strategies to take account of the options that new technology will bring. We mustn't let technology dictate what offers we can make to our passengers. We have to be able to have ticketing offers that are right for the communities we serve, not ticketing options that are specified because of technology. We need clearly reducing uncertainty and lack of knowledge about how to pay for a journey on a bus or tram is an important way of improving the attractiveness of public transport. And mobile phone and contactless bank cards are likely to be, I think, the way forward, not a dedicated transport product. I think the transitional process, as we move through that, where we are now, the complications we have now, to some new technology in the next couple of years, the transitional process will be difficult, particularly as we move away from cash as a universal medium, which is still the case in very many places. It must be right, though, that when an ordinary citizen is carrying something in their pocket or handbag which can be used to make travel journeys and to buy everything else, it must be right to allow them to use that and not to require them to have something else that's just to do with transport. So to an extent, I might suggest that integration probably isn't about having a single ticket. It's more likely to be about having a payment system that is integrated into how we all pay for other goods and services, and a system that will reduce the barriers that have actually arisen from the complex ways in which we've tried to move away from cash over the last few years. They are complex. In many places, it's extraordinarily hard to know how you should pay for a ticket. And I'm hopeful that there are going to be some exciting new opportunities that will come from new ticketing technology in the next couple of years. Thank you.